is starting at 6:32 p.m. We are being filmed, and I guess what we'll do is, as we usually do, we'll have a welcome and public comment and review the agenda. First of all, welcome, everyone. And I would like to say just one word. This is the fourth meeting the Board of Trustees have had this month. And we're doing this to get caught up on some very important issues. I'm very pleased with the effort that the board has made because we are dealing with a lot of issues right now. They happen every day. We are trying to deal specifically with the question of the charter school finance resolution, and for that reason we've had two of the special meetings, one with Mark Kennan and one where Senator Bruce Tarr will be arriving this evening in some period, probably around 7 o'clock. But my point is that I realize how much work and time people put into this. And I think at the last meeting, I lost a little bit of control and I didn't let a lot of things happen in terms of interaction that did not adequately reflect how much I appreciate the time everyone has, how valuable our time is, and how much we really need. I mean, this is our board meeting and we need to really focus on our board issues when we're here. As in terms of the procedural issues of this, the open comment, the public comment is a public comment. We are not engaging in a question and answer with the board, and I let people go so far as to not only ask questions, but present questions to the board to ask, and then let people interrupt. And I apologize for that, because again, I appreciate how much time everyone at this table has put in, especially this month. Going forward, we will be much more observant and in much greater compliance with the protocol and decorum of the board meeting. We will have people have time limits on how long we can speak. We will ask the people first be asked to be acknowledged. There will be no interruptions. And again, we have work to do, and I greatly appreciate how much time everyone's put in here. And we may never have a meeting like the one we had again, where we have so much give and take. But I just want to know that I'll be much more vigilant about that going forward. Because again, I do appreciate the time that everyone puts in here, and I don't mean to let conversations go on that could be held at the board meeting. This is a board meeting above and beyond all things. So, having said that, is there any public comment?
Yes, I'll make it.
Well, yeah,
fine,
yes.
But it was just to say, I thought you displayed a very appropriate amount of departing from the regular Robert's Rules of Orders. There are times not to have that feeling of Gustavo-esque. And if you had stopped and said, no, you can't make those statements, I think it would have been felt that I thought you did an appropriate balance. So I think it's also good to get some work done because you're right, we need 4 meetings a month.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Gordon.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Well, why don't we go ahead then and start with the agenda. We will review and approve the minutes. I believe we have 2 sets of minutes to approve and some changes. We'll have the State of the School report by Tony, Executive Director. We'll have a review of the DESE open conditions. We'll have an update on the Founders event planning. Committee updates and motions. We obviously have a lot more committee work to go ahead here, but most importantly, the Governance Committee has a good update for us, which Jay will fill us in on. Then at some point, Bruce Tarr will arrive. We again expect him around 7 o'clock. He had a wake to attend at Legal Mover, and so but I did talk to his chief of staff who said he would be here around 7 o'clock. So if Bruce gets here earlier, we can interrupt the order. If he gets here later, we can put him off for that. And then we will go to the discussion of possible agenda items for the next meeting, which is, believe it or not, a week from tonight. That's the first Wednesday of every month. So we'll get into that also, and then we'll adjourn. And hopefully we can keep this meeting within the 2 hour time frame. So with that, let's start with the review and approval of the minutes. We have before us the 2 sets of minutes. We have the Thursday, September 8th, 2011 Board of Trustees meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at this and review it? I would say, I'm not sure how to make a suggestion here, but I would say, Tony, on this note here, it says Mr. Blackman explained that the board would table the vote on the resolution until Mark Kennan could address the board. Where our position really is, we want to hear all points of view on this. It's not we're waiting for one person to vote. And,
Just
yes,
a way of order.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Have a motion first and then.
okay.
And then discussion.
Okay. Okay, well,
I'll move to accept the minutes of the meeting of September 8th.
mhm.
Second.
September 8th, I'm sorry.
That's the long one,
Yeah,
yeah,
right,
that was
sure.
the Van Pelt.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay. Any discussion?
I think you answered.
Well, yeah, just, this is my question right here, is that we're really, we weren't waiting until just Mark spoke, and we'll hear Bruce, but the whole idea is we're really collecting information at this point.
Correct.
And we're not sure what our point of view is, so we're not voting, we're not doing anything, we're hearing different points of view on the discussion.
Correct.
That's really what the board's present position is.
That's correct. So you may want to make an adjustment there.
What page is that?
That's on the first page under welcome public comment. It says Mr. Byron explained to the board would table a vote on the resolution until Mark and would address the board. And actually, I may have suggested that we table any vote or formal motion until we have heard from Mark Kennan, who had indicated by that point he would address us. So in terms of just the accuracy of the minutes themselves, that would be, that would be my recollection is that, because I wouldn't actually specifically state the board must do something, particularly in a public.
Well said.
Are we still in discussion period? I noticed on item 5, I don't know what page number it is, but it's well into the thing, in Jennifer Feller, she says that under academics, we meet common curriculum and further training for teachers, blah, blah, blah. My curiosity, and this could be the wrong time to ask this, but have we moved towards developing that curriculum that will address that?
Yeah, I don't think this is time to talk about
Okay.
that, because this is really about revising minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, program meeting, there is a program meeting next month, where there will be further discussion on that.
You got
set of issues.
But you know the question I'm asking, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gordon.
Shall we call the question and vote?
Any more comments? All in favor of the minutes as amended? Aye. Okay, we have the second set of minutes to approve. That is from Tuesday, September 13th. Did anyone have a chance to look at those?
I'll move to accept the minutes of September 13th.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Is there any discussion?
Just a question I have on, under section 3, it has approval of the minutes. And it says Mr. Cannon makes a motion to approve the minutes. Mr. Crowley seconds the motion and it passes unanimously. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
That's
sorry,
all right.
the minutes. Beg your pardon.
That's great. We've got a couple of minutes in front of us.
There was one request for a change in the way the wording was done about the public comment from Kathy Clancy, who attended the last meeting. And she requested that the statement in the minutes as it currently reads, it says, Ms. Clancy stated that she has been in contact with Senator Tarr regarding supporting such legislation, and he has responded that he will. And her clarification on this is that the communication to Senator Tarr was from the Gloucester School Committee, signed by Chair Val Gilman, which Senator Tarr responded in writing to the Gloucester School Committee that he supports the resolution. This wasn't a personal conversation with Senator Tarr. So I would suggest that we make an amendment to the minutes to take that into account.
If we incorporate that, do we just put in both of those paragraphs, the one in quotations and then her clarification, or?
No, I think we just make the change
Okay.
that the resolution was from the Gloucester School Committee, signed by Chair Val Gilman, and was supported, and that Senator Tarr responded writing to the Gloucester School Committee that he supports the resolution.
It was reported yesterday. All right.
Okay?
Any other comments, additions?
It's a pretty dramatic and well-written description of the whole interchange. Pretty real, actually.
So, as a point of order, do we need a motion to accept the minutes with the identified changes?
Yeah, as amended.
As
amended.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can review the motion if you like. So I would move to accept the minutes of the meeting of September 13th as amended.
Will you amend your second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, okay. All right, on to the next item. So we'll do the state of the school report. Tony?
So the two items listed for the agenda are the recent ESE visit from the charter school office. This was from Barry Barnett and Allison Bagg, particularly with regard to a sort of preliminary visit prior to coming out in October when they do a 2-day visit. And it was to see how we're doing in terms of our SPED, increase in our SPED office and personnel, and how that adjustment planning is going. And it was a very good meeting, and they were pleased with what they saw. So we're looking forward to them coming back out sometime in the next first 2 weeks of October, and that'll be for a 2-day visit to really look at special education files, meet with Les Keene as the new director of special ed, and meet with the special ed staff. So, this is a regular part of the work that office does. But it was good to have them out, good to have them see the changes. In terms of the MCAS results, this is something that we'll actually address at length really in program committee work and in the next meeting of the board, but I did want to make a couple of comments, and that's why I asked to have it on the agenda. And the first is really just to, there's been a lot of hyperbole in the reporting on MCAS results throughout the state, really. It follows a pattern every year when they come out. And so the first thing I want to do is indicate that we actually consider the MCAS a very valuable assessment. It's one of many for schools to use in terms of getting information on student achievement throughout their school, or in the case of large public districts, throughout the district. So for us, it's very good to have a starting point now with a real indication of the students that we're working with in terms of the state level assessment. Having said that, I have to say that it was, as an educator, I find sometimes the way that often in the public press, state results are reviewed, because it's often simplistic in the way that they take a look at MCAS results. And I went through this when I was in Ireland, and it was much, much worse in that, for example, Gloucester Community Arts Charter School opened in the much publicized late date of September 23rd, a month after any of the other schools in the district. And so that meant for all of the students that we had, that they started any preparation with us no sooner than September 23rd in our modular trailers, as they were described. So that we had them for those 64 students we had for approximately 7 months prior to them sitting this first state assessment with us. The rest of the students, 64 to 89 sat the MCAS, arrived in February or later. So we had them for 4 months before they sat their first exam. They were in sending schools, even if they were in 4th grade, our youngest group, for years prior to taking any state assessment with us. And if they were in 7th grade, they were in school for at least 7 years in other institutions. So this sort of indication by some, fortunately a minority, that an MCAS in this situation is some kind of glaring indication of a failed educational experiment, I think is absurd. What it is a valuable tool, a tool for us to get from one type of assessment. But look at our kids and how they're doing in comparison to other kids statewide, particularly in terms of effort, in terms of their growth rate, with students with similar testing profiles. That's the most useful information that I think, and that we look forward to having ongoing discussions of program committee in terms of what that means for us. I think that unfortunately the pattern that's been around for a very long time in the country, not to mention in the state, as well as in the district here, both for the Gloucester district and for the Gloucester Community Charter Schools, the math results throughout the country continue to be extremely poor, even at their very highest level. This has been a concern for at least the past 5 to 10 years. It was a major topic of conversation throughout my time period in Ireland, where the European Union was extremely concerned not only with what was happening with their results, but of course when they compared them to the U.S. results have been going down steadily for over a decade. And compared to their international peers, particularly in Europe, they're appalling. And so I think that at every level, we have our work cut out for us to take a look at what we're doing in terms of mathematics instruction. And particularly in a school where, for one of the things the MCAS doesn't really do directly is take into account socioeconomic, and the impact of socioeconomics on any given population. One of the largest groups that we have at the school come from veterans, which has historically been not only one of the poorest or most challenged, however you wish to put it, socioeconomic groups in the city, but also one of the poorest performing in both ELA and in mathematics. And I think one of the things I wanted to say in terms of this, which doesn't go directly to the plans which will come out of program committee work, but one of the things I minded most when I was in Ireland about this reporting, which would identify in Ireland on the national exam system the best schools based simply on national exams, and respecting the fact that many left brain students perform extremely well in standardized tests, many right brain students don't. So there's always going to be some difference there anyway. But on top of that, I was in probably the second or third highest fee charging school in the country. My population of children came from families where they were second or third generation university educated, and where almost all of them, without exception, were feeling directly the benefit of, at that time, the Celtic Tiger economy. And so they had the wealth and resources to provide what they called grinds after school, ongoing tutoring and support for students, and enrichment activities beyond the fact that they also had parents who tended to read to them in the evening, tended to go to the library and get them books, tended to buy them books. So in terms of literacy and all of that development all along the way, they had a level of privilege. That right down the street in the next village over was Ballymun. The Ballymun district was the absolute poorest district in the Dublin area. And every single year in the paper, they would list the Ballymun schools as poor performing substandard schools. When in fact, for those families, having a steady increase in the number of students who went to school every day of the week was a huge success. Having the percent of students who stayed in school and graduated from high school was a huge success. And they got no credit for that at all. In fact, the teachers at many of those schools were outstanding. They worked extremely hard, and yet they were torn apart in terms of their professional achievement every single year without fail in the paper. And as you could see in the Globe, just in a follow-up article just a few days ago, they were talking about the socioeconomic gap and the fact that closing that gap in terms of just MCAS results in those in the lowest economic strata, that has continued to prove difficult, even though in the statistics just sent out by the Mass Charter Public School Association, it indicates that the Mass Charter Public Schools on the whole have actually closed that gap more than some of their public counterparts in sending districts. But again, I think that it's really important to put in perspective what the MCAS is. What it is a useful assessment tool. There's a great deal that goes into it in terms of where the kids came from, where they started from in terms of their achievement before they arrived at this school or any other school. And it has great value in that context. It actually can be, what it is not, is a tool that should be used as a sledgehammer to judge schools without taking into account the impact of socioeconomics and without years of comparative data from more than that one assessment. Because I think when you do that, you simplify what is a much more complex issue. You do damage to schools, which is unnecessary, and you insult fine teachers that may be at any of these schools. I don't know a great deal, for example, about the teachers at Veterans, but I can assure you in this past year, working with the population that we have here, that I have a much better understanding of some of the issues that they're dealing with on a regular basis, often with short resources in terms of staffing and support or understanding in terms of special ed instruction and the building of teams between general ed teachers and special ed teachers. And until those issues can be addressed, I think people should tread very carefully in judging institutions based on this one assessment without taking that into account. I can absolutely assure you there have got to be teachers and veterans who are working very, very hard and are probably dealing with a very population and diversity of students in terms of learning styles and needs that is more challenging probably than some of the other Gloucester schools. And so again, you know, whether it's the Gloucester Community Arts Charter School or comparisons within the district, the public district of Gloucester, looking at West Parish's performance versus Veterans versus whatever the school might be, that to do it without taking into account these other factors is, I believe, simplistic and damaging. Having said all that, long breath, I think that this is a very important starting point for us. We have, which is no surprise given where our students have come from and their reasons for coming, because obviously they came to the charter for a reason, that we have a significant amount of work ahead of us. We have a significant challenge ahead of us. And fortunately, we have very good people in a real staff this year in terms of the resources in both general ed and special ed and other areas of student support to carry this work forward. And so I know that a committee is being formed to take a look at both the MCAS results and interpreting what that data means in terms of what we can gather from it, but also to then carry that into specific adjustments to educational program and its delivery. So I look forward to that work as it carries forward.
Thank you, Tony, can I just add something? I think we certainly take the results very seriously, as you certainly emphasized just now. And I don't think any of us believe that simple talk about this at a board meeting is going to resolve it. It's the work and the action, the day-to-day labor of all the teachers in the trenches doing this that's going to turn the corner. And you mentioned the issue around social economic background and everything. I think a number of us on this board and founders who have now moved on, and many of the teachers came on to this project with a much broader concern about the well-being of the very students you were just talking about. Certainly for me, this school has never been about my kids and what's happening there. It's about what's happening, particularly with the students and veterans, and particularly the students who are on the lower end of the scale economically in the city, as well as the students who don't fit in other ways, students who may be high achievers, may be extremely talented in certain areas, and simply were not challenged in the district schools. And that's not a stroke against the district schools. We can't be all things to all people. It's not intended to be an insult or a cut. This is a statement from me, and this is a very personal thing for me, frankly, but I think it applies to some of the rest of us on this board, that the results of MCAS are very real, a statement of the challenge that we signed up for. That's why we're here, that's why we started the school, and we do have the expertise to address it. Some of us on this board have had a good deal of experience, many, many years, some of us decades of experience in research and in our own practice and teaching. And we know some of the practices that need to be put in place in this school, as in many other schools across the district, across the state, across the country, to start to turn this around. There is solid research about what can turn around the results on MCAS and in academic achievement otherwise for students who are traditionally treated as second-class citizens, who are essentially sidelined because there are excuses made about whether they can achieve or not. We are committed to making that happen in this school, and that's what we signed up for, and that's why I'm here, and I know that's why other people are on this board and founded this school.
Thank you.
Very well put. Thank you.
Confidence builder for the rest of us.
Anything else?
Yeah, it's great to hear Dave speak, because I think it's that kind of passion which improves at schools, and that level of commitment someone, I think it was asked, or indicated that this is, the MCAS results are a red flag that could lead to a white flag. And what I would just say is far from it. In fact, what Dave really said there is this is a challenge that we readily accept. It's what the charter was all about right from its inception, and that far from raising any white flag of the standard, this is our starting point. We're ready. It's what we fully expected would be part of the challenge, and it's one we intend to take on.
I would just have a comment. I think that the present, our system often terms scoring low as a crisis, and my particular view is that it may be a problem, but it's also an opportunity for us to meet, and we have Annette Sullivan from Pittsburgh State is helping us with differentiated instruction, and substantive and sustainable learning doesn't happen in a capsule or overnight. It takes time, and unfortunately, some systems that we have in place to evaluate student work happens over a course of 120 or 160 days, and it's more the bigger picture that is important to focus on and build upon the successes as we go forward.
The thing I'd like to add to what I'm nodding my head here, agreeing with everybody as they speak, is that we have a particular challenge in this school, not only because we have an enormously diverse student body, and because we're committed to individualized models of learning, but also because we want to change the elementary school curriculum. We want to move the arts into that curriculum in a way that they haven't been. So the only thing I would say, besides echoing and applauding everything that's been said about how we need to take the MCAS results very seriously and work very hard on those skills of our students. At the same time, I think we cannot make the mistake that a lot of low-achieving district schools make around this state and around the country of becoming gun-shy about the MCAS results and becoming test-driven, because our curriculum vision is a much broader vision, a much broader humane vision of children's learning than test scores. We can get, I think, to good test score results for all our kids, but en route to it, we have to remember to have room in this school for creativity, for kids who are really eccentric and different in their learning styles, really different, and whose test results won't be good for quite a while. So that, our long-term goal, I think, has to be, we are a public school, the MCAS is the standard in this state. Our long-term goal has to be to do really quite well with the MCAS test rating system. But we will fail as an experiment in this charter if we succumb to testism and if we don't see the bigger picture that this is a school committed to something different.
Very good.
Agenda item number 5, the DESE open conditions. Back to Tony.
Yeah, this is just a standard one that we decided would be a standing item on the agenda until they're no longer ongoing. But the appointment of a new member with experience and expertise in public sector management. We've got coming up shortly the report from an update from the governance committee with a new potential member coming on to the board. And as we continue to look to expand the board, one of the questions out there still is, even though clearly Dr. Dean, when he joined the board, having been a former principal, was in the public sector and would qualify. But then he was appointed too early for it to qualify. So obviously the intent was to have more than one public sector person on the board. We then had Susan Ho join the board, who's had a career in schools. And so that would qualify as being in the public sector. But we don't know at this point. We've had no communication with the DSE with regard to how we will identify whether a candidate has now met that. And I would, so just through the chair, I would suggest that we be in touch with the department that they do receive all indications of candidates for nominations to the board. And as part of their feedback on those, I suggest that we ask when that condition has been met, if they would please notify us so that we are aware of that. So at this point, we don't have any indication whether Susan Ho, for example, who has been appointed to the board since those conditions were put in place. And it's another question if we have a new member about to join and ongoing until we know. So Mr. Chair, I would suggest that's something that we should ask for as part of the feedback that we receive.
So we can't blame all this public sector stuff on Susan yet? Is that what you're saying?
Not officially.
Well, who can we blame?
So moving on to ongoing compliance with open meeting order, it's just a standard ongoing condition. And even if it wasn't there, it would be a part of what we do as members of the board of a public entity. We would have ongoing condition to abide by and support open meeting law. So to that end, I have been in touch with Jonathan Sklarczyk at the Attorney General's office to ask him for some possible dates when they might come out and do another training with the board. That was something that we had talked about committing to ongoing on an annual basis, whether with the Attorney General's office or another group. And he indicated that he'd get back in touch with me with some dates. So I'll report back as soon as I know when that training would be. Just in terms of that, although there have been 2 complaints made to the Attorney General's office, and legal counsel is working on those, both by I believe, the same individual who's litigant in the lawsuit. Those have been passed on for legal counsel and to the Attorney General's office to deal with. There are no complaints at this point have been substantiated against or action taken against the school in any way. And I appreciate the board's commitment to the importance of open meeting law and the hard work that's going into that. So thank you to everyone for that.
With new board members, we still need more training, et cetera, so.
Yeah, and we should anyway, as part of the orientation of all new board and returning board. Report all changes in staff and CSO within 48 hours. We continue to do that. As was noted in an article in the Los Daily Times just a few weeks back. They had been in touch with the DESE, and the DESE confirmed that we were doing that.
Good, because that was one of their main areas of annoyance.
Yeah, it was.
Yes.
So I think we're in good shape there, and we intend to continue to do that. So that's the update on DESE open conditions.
Thank you, Tony. Founders event planning, are we back to you again, Tony?
We have a Parents Association meeting tomorrow night, just before curriculum night, and we'll be looking for parent volunteers to join that group. I don't know if there are members of the board who would like to serve on a small in-school committee to put that event together. The question I have, we had mentioned a couple of dates at one of the board meetings, and then I couldn't find anything that could be finalized. Have we finalized the date? We were talking about November.
Well, November 11th was going to be for the board retreat.
Correct.
But I don't know about a founders event.
I don't think we did.
No, I don't think
Any thoughts for discussion?
If it's before November 15th, I could probably volunteer our band as the entertainment.
Wow.
That's a very kind offer, Gordon. Thank you.
Very nice.
I have to pay them, but I think it would be worth it. We'd have a decent crowd, wouldn't we?
Well, there's Saturday the 10th, Sunday, oh no, sorry. There's Saturday the 12th is before the 15th, or Saturday the 5th.
That's a holiday weekend.
It is, yeah, Veterans Day right before it, so. Is Saturday the 5th too soon? Or?
I guess I question it.
And that's you're gonna, we're right in the middle of the political season as well.
Yeah. I just question whether this is the right time to use that. If there's a reason to do it beyond recognizing the founders, I think maybe we should go ahead. But personally, I think there's a lot to be done, a lot of work to be done, and I would suggest maintaining focus on the academic program and on the issues that support that as our priority, and not get off into other
Party.
events and so forth. But
This is a form of outreach in some respects, sorry.
Okay.
But I mean, in that respect, it's outreach, and we need to do more in terms of getting a coalition between parents and ideas that could stimulate more interest in the school. So I look at it a little bit that way. I'm not sure what would the particular, obviously there needs to be a bigger, I agree with what you're saying, Dave. The concept has to be a little broader, to justify allocating the resources to that effort.
maybe we need to rename it as
Well, I think that's it.
rather than being about founders, that's about the outreach we're talking about next. Yeah. 'Cause I think the original idea and motivation behind it was to bring in more public officials into the school and to involve the community in the school.
Okay. Well, what should we do about that? Recognizing that our state senator.
Through the chair, I would
Yeah.
recommend that we table further discussion of this agenda item at this point. We can come back to it later in the meeting, but would like to recognize Senator Tar for joining us, and given how tight I know these guys' schedules are, and what a long day he's already had, that we move it through the chair to...
We'll take it. Why don't we go ahead and move right to agenda item 8. Senator Tar, thank you for being here. I know you had not a great amount of notice. I think we called last week, and AJ was very happy to schedule you. I know you had a busy day, so it's terrific to see you. I would almost like to start by saying the man who needs no introduction, but he's the minority leader of the House. You've been in, what, since 91, is that correct?
in the
Legislature, excuse me.
Yes.
Yes. And you have been a prolific legislator at that, during that time. Would you want to come up to the table and sit and because we'd love to have a more... Oh yeah, Bruce, also remember that the camera is also...
Okay.
And we are, however much time we need, we do have a discussion this year. 2 weeks ago, we had Mark Kennan, who is an advocate for the charter school movement, who spoke about charter school financing. We understand that you're working on legislation or review legislation or that is an issue. And in terms of our goal is to do some due diligence as a board and to learn what's going on with charter school funding legislation, where it is, where it's going. Obviously, you have you are up here enacting legislation every day, so you'd be as strong a person to tell us what's going on and what your feelings are about it. And so we're here to listen, really.
Okay, well, actually, I came to listen to all of you, and so I'm happy to hear your concerns and to hear what the board's thoughts are, and to tell you that the only piece of legislation really that I'm working on is one that would create a study group to be able to look at not only the issues of finance around charter schools, but also sort of best practices and try to understand what's going on with charter schools and what's available to be replicated, or perhaps what's to be learned from things that are not to be replicated. And so it's more of a broad brush sort of a working group kind of look at this issue. Certainly anytime we discuss charter schools, there is no doubt that funding rises to the top of the discussion, and I think it would be healthy for us to be able to discuss that in an orderly way, in an educated way, rather than to have what all too often winds up being confrontational discussions that seem to be episodic in nature and sporadic in where they develop. So I think there is certainly a better approach to look at this, and I think because it is an important issue for all of us, that we ought to create that mechanism. And what I've contemplated up until now has been a committee or a study group that would have a finite kind of time frame, although the more I think about it, I'm not convinced that that may be the best approach. Certainly, one of the problems that state government and most forms of government have is they oftentimes dwell on things without reaching a result, and so there's always a desire to have a time frame so that it will motivate a particular result, in this case having a report concluded. And while I do think having some of that information so that the rest of us can make decisions based on what is gleaned from the discussion is important, I'm not convinced that that ought to be a one-time exercise. And so thinking about now when we try to create it in installments or how we approach that. But that's pretty much what there is, from my perspective on the subject. Oftentimes, the issue of funding comes up in the context of the state budget. As you know, that is debated primarily in the spring and concluded, at least we hope to conclude every year, so that a new budget is in place by the 1st of July, so that the fiscal year can begin on time with the budget in place. And so while there will be bills filed, and there are bills pending in the legislature about how to fund charter schools, most often my experience has been that where a lot of that debate takes place is in the context of the state budget, where amendments will be filed to modify the way funding is accomplished, to increase funding, decrease funding, those kind of things. And so it certainly is an ongoing process. I think it certainly, the intensity of the discussion ebbs and flows, sometimes for reasons that are obvious and sometimes not. But at any rate, I'm happy to hear your thoughts and and discuss the subject with you.
Well, I just throw a question out there, Bruce, in terms of like what you're looking to evaluate or study. You said that you're going to look for certain, I mean, what kind of things are you looking for? Is that, can you be very specific
Well, I
about
think
subjects that you're going to?
one of the most basic questions that, again, I think is on the minds of a lot of folks is, are we funding charter schools in the appropriate way? Obviously, we're conducting that exercise in one particular way, which actually is a combination of funding, if you look at it, because for transitional years, in essence, we are providing funding to help offset the cost of dollars lost to a sending school district or host school district. But in other ways, those school districts are transferring dollars after that fact. So there's a combination of things. The question is often raised, ought the state have a line item to be able to fund the operations of charter schools? I think that has some benefits. I think it may have some liabilities in terms of its imposition. The benefit would be that I think if the state were to step up to the plate and provide the funding, then it would take some of the contentiousness out of the charter school issue. I think the liability for that, on the flip side, would be that if we make the argument that charter schools are in fact public schools and we are educating students from a particular community, then that community might be less invested in the future of the charter school if the funding is coming from the state. So I think it depends on how you look at it, and that's why, again, I think there's almost a short-term and a long-term to this kind of a discussion. The short-term is how do we stabilize the situation in a very difficult economic climate where resources are very, very scarce and putting pressure on a whole host of things. I think the longer term is what is the right structure when we're not dealing with the short-term crisis mentality to try to ensure that we have stable funding for the things that we want to accomplish.
Yeah, just through the chair, first I want to express my great appreciation of all the comments you've made the whole way along. You always made it clear immediately as a first point that no statements that you're making are a direct reflection on how you feel about this particular charter, Gloucester Community Arts Charter, the benefit of the education. In fact, you've made it clear all the way along that's not an issue that you're addressing or speaking to. And instead, you brought up what's a thorny topic and waded into it with some courage in an environment where it takes courage to talk about charter funding. And I really appreciate it because it's not easy. I mean, if you put it in a line item, one of the other difficulties, I think, for the charter movement is that a line item is susceptible to the winds of politics. And so if it was entirely in a line item, the entire movement could be eliminated at the stroke of a pen or so reduced that it would absolutely guarantee failure, not just of a specific charter, but of the movement itself, which isn't any good for anybody. One of the things which I had mentioned in another meeting, and actually talked to her about directly when she spoke at Harvard, was that Diane Ravitch, who's done some changes in terms of her own thinking over the past few years, but even she would not argue that the charter movement itself, partly because of worry about funding and what it means to any sending district, has caused more discussion about education and fruitful dialogue than perhaps in all of the previous half century before that. But I think it's very difficult because the charter movement on the whole, particularly in terms of the approval of charters, is looking for districts with significant low-income challenged populations and to make sure that they're being provided services and with a choice in education will be beneficial to them. And by definition, it means you're actually often approving charters in districts that will find the funding extremely difficult after the initial period to support. And how you work out those two things where there's some major benefit to it, but on the other hand, based on where charters get approved, eventually, there's complications there because for many schools, which I think is a very legitimate argument, the ability to make adjustments if you're a particular executive of a school to reduce your full-time equivalency staff sufficiently may not be possible or easy. And particularly just in our conversation earlier this evening, where you're dealing with this school, we had 29% of our students on IEPs last year, significantly higher than the local district. And even at the local district level, the ability to meet the demands of that population. I mean, next to the issue of retirement programs, these are big, big issues for, facing every single city in the state and in other states. And it's not easy, and I just really, really appreciate the approach to actually get a group together to put some hard work and some creative thinking into it. And fully support, even while in terms of a line item personally at any rate, I'd be very, very nervous about anything where the funding for charter movement went into a line item specifically and only a line item, because I think it'd be too susceptible to the changing winds of politics, which you've done very well at surviving. But it's not an easy world out there, and coming up with some other creative way that recognizes the importance of the movement itself and supporting it to move forward, but also finds a way in terms of the funding that is sustainable over the long term, would be a very interesting discussion to be a part of.
I appreciate your comments, and I particularly appreciate your recognition of my comments throughout the process that we've all been involved in, which I think has been extremely burdensome for all of us, and I wish that weren't the case. But from my perspective, my comments were about the process that occurred and about the damage that I feel has been done to one of the best approval processes in the entire country. And I still harbor those concerns. And my concerns have been about the appropriateness of the process, obedience to the law, and fairness. But I do appreciate your comments. And I do struggle, I think as we all do, with trying to address some of the issues that you described. And that's why I concur that I think if we had some dialogue about this that wasn't in the heat of a contentious discussion, even for us as legislators, because again, oftentimes someone introduces an amendment during floor debate when we're doing the state budget, where we have 600 or 700, maybe even 1,000 amendments, and folks are trying to make a decision on that amendment in the pressurized environment of floor debate. I think it would be better to remove this discussion from that environment to the extent that we can. And I appreciate your comments about things that have line items are vulnerable, but I would also suggest that the legislature votes on every line item, and it's its responsibility to establish whether or not that item is a priority and at what level it should be funded. And unfortunately, this issue sometimes becomes intertwined with other funding issues, but I would suggest to you that Chapter 70 itself has not been immune to having reductions, and I'm not so sure that charter school funding should enjoy a special status as being immune from the appropriating decisions of state government. As you all probably know, I have fought very hard when Chapter 70 has been, when there have been attempts to change it, and I'm in the midst of a very passionate fight right now about Chapter 70 funding in regard to the proposed gaming legislation that is before us. You may know that there is a fund established in the bill that is before us, which is intended to provide additional education funding, not to supplant Chapter 70. And you may also know that I have a pending amendment to that bill, which would suggest that to the extent those funds are expended, their first purpose needs to be to eliminate disparities and unfair treatment as between like communities, and to try to get every community up to a minimum of 20% of its foundation budget from the state. And I feel very passionately about that. If we're going to put more money on the table, it ought not to be left to the whims of whatever the prevailing thought is of the day about educational funding. I believe we have a commitment to our communities. And so I'll save you the rest of the floor speech, but I guarantee you'll be hearing more about it for that same reason. I think when you put new dollars on the table, you have to put them out in a fair way and in a way that addresses some long-standing problems that this community in particular has faced with regard to the Chapter 70 formula. And we have an opportunity to do that right now. I'm not sure that we will, but I can tell you that I will expend a lot of energy in that fight.
If the funding was changed to a line item, whatever, and in the budget, there's only so much money that the state has to get out. Whether you get it one way or the other, it seems like it's limited. And my question to you is, if it's line item budgeted or whatever the term is, and there's a problem and there's very little money and they cut it in half, and so that the charter school gets half or 2/3 of what the other public schools are getting, how is that fair to the kids of Gloucester that are going to this school?
Well, it's a good question, and my response is that everything the state spends money on is included in a line item. And our democratic process requires the legislature to make a determination about how much funding should be spent in each of those line items. And if Chapter 70 is one methodology of funding our public schools, if we were to develop another line item, then I think it would be up to the legislature to exercise its judgment about what the appropriate level of funding would be. And that all is true of other things. I mean, you mentioned special education. You may know that last year, special education, through the program that I helped to create called the Circuit Breaker, was woefully underfunded. That was a decision that affected all of the public schools, all of them. And it's a separate line item called the Circuit Breaker. And I'm sure I'm fairly familiar with it. I certainly know that David is. I don't want to retread it, but essentially the idea behind Circuit Breaker is that the state will step in when a student reaches a threshold. And in this case, the threshold is 4 times the foundation budget. The state pays a percentage of those sped costs. That is a separate account that affects every school. And we had to make a decision. Now, did I agree with the decision? No, but I'm not always on the winning end of votes. But the point was that's exactly the scenario described.
That's right.
And that's the process that we have to undertake as the appropriating authority. And I think it would put it on the same footing as all of the other things that we appropriate to.
Except Chapter 70, right?
Chapter 70 has its own line item. I would suggest that even Chapter 70 needs to be revisited.
Why have 2 separate fundings? Why have 2 separate funding avenues? Why is it important to have charter schools separate from other schools?
Because a charter school is a different form of a school. It is a public school, but there are many who believe that it is a different form and should have funding accordingly.
And what difference makes it, what is the difference that makes you think it needs different funding avenues?
Well, for instance, state universities and state colleges have a different line item from University of Massachusetts. They all provide collegiate level education, but because they do it in different ways, they have different line items.
Yeah, but we're talking elementary school to elementary school, not, just doesn't seem logical to me.
And the University of Massachusetts educates folks in the same way that Salem State University does, for degrees that are very similar in nature in many cases. And they have separate line items because they are separate methodologies of achieving the same goal.
I just got another question, not necessarily related. Having been only recently involved with public schools in the state, I was surprised by the differences from town to town in the level of tuition funding per student. And having a house in New Hampshire for many years where everything is tied to property tax, that's always been a huge issue up there, and it's likely to become eventually constitutional because of, if you're in Canterbury, the amount you have available for your child's education is massively increased over where I have my house in Chichester. But even within Massachusetts, the difference is thousands of dollars. And is there, this is obviously somewhat off topic, but when you think about the effort with Title I starting in 1965, there's been a consistent effort in the country to try and address what is actually a very unequal education system. And one of the reason I think you see such passion in the city of Gloucester, partly which I appreciate, even though sometimes passion results in difficult discussions, but part of it is that Gloucester's a city with some major challenges financially, and You look at the funding per student in Gloucester compared to some of the surrounding towns that may be within miles, and it's massive. There is absolutely no way to deliver a equal, equitable, which was supposedly a dream of the original Constitution, education, which, according to Jefferson, although some would say he was an elitist and he was only talking about property owners back then. but for those of the rest of us, we were sort of raised to actually believe that we felt that education was important for everybody, and equal access to a reasonably equal, even though it's impossible to fully achieve that education. When you look at that discrepancy, I found it both deeply disturbing and just a massive shock that it was so enormously different. Is there any mechanism being looked at in discussion to try and address that issue? Because in terms of actual dollar amount, that's far bigger than this issue of the jobs.
And that's why I'm glad you raised the point. I don't think it's off topic at all. And I think if there is one most clear unifying factor for the people in this community, regardless of where their children go to school and regardless of which schools they're interested in, it ought to be the reform of Chapter 70. And there are disparities between like communities that are very, very disturbing. Now, I would point out that not only was it an idea that the founding fathers of Massachusetts had, there is actually a specific constitutional provision which provides a mandate to us to provide funding for every student. And you may or may not know that over the years, the state has wrestled with this, like other states have wrestled with it, and tried to accomplish things in various ways. There was a time, for instance, when there was a tool called Equal Educational Opportunity Grants, which were given to communities to try to make up the differences that they couldn't make with because they couldn't raise enough money through their property tax. What I would say, and there's an interesting parallel between litigation and the legislature taking action, such that, in my opinion, my experience, almost every time the legislature has acted, it's been because of the pressure of a lawsuit. Those lawsuits have not succeeded in the courts, but they have succeeded in motivating the legislature. So, for instance, if we start back in 1978, there was one case. There was another one in the 80s. There was another one after that led to the Education Reform Act of 1993. And if you can permit me a slight digression, I would suggest that in the Ed Reform Act of 1993, there was an attempt to create a comprehensive system at addressing this very issue, Tony. And unfortunately, it used two different approaches. One was to assess what every student needed based on the community that they were in. So we look at inputs, and we look at the cost of those inputs. And on the other side was an attempt to measure the community's ability to pay. And so we developed that ability to pay, and we figure out through that formula what a community should be contributing. And on the other side, we look at what it should be costing, and the gap ideally was to be provided by the state. Now, there are a number of problems with that. And in fact, you may know that, again, reluctantly, I voted against the Education Reform Act of 1993 because I perceived it as being unfair to the communities I represented. And unfortunately, time has proven that to be true. And that wasn't a popular decision at the time because I'm a very strong supporter of education. But I could not support a formula that would disadvantage communities like this one for a variety of reasons. And by the way, the formula was largely created by a Cape Ann resident. We could talk about that later. But the difficulty is that originally, the formula, in my opinion, miscalculated a community's ability to pay because it was skewed toward property wealth. So if you take a community like this one, that has a lot of waterfront property, but also has a lot of families that have lived in homes from generation to generation that couldn't afford to buy those homes today, looking at property wealth alone is not a good measure. Now the response was to try to calibrate that by looking at income, so that we look at the two factors that you might think would work. But for a lot of reasons, in my opinion, the formula is still heavily skewed toward property wealth.
Can I just ask you a quickie about that, just so I understand?
Yeah.
But if it is done that way, doesn't that mean the city is able to actually collect more property taxes to apply to the schools?
Well, in theory, you would think that to be true, Gordon, but unfortunately, again, the wealth is measured in two ways. And so when we look at the property factor, let me take a step back.
Because I thought when you said the ability of the cities to pay, it meant the city,
That's
not
correct.
the people living.
Well-
So the people stuck in their generations of that, they're not actually paying for school.
That's right.
So I'm not sure I understand
So-
why high values
So-
don't get more money.
So let me take a step
Yeah.
back and explain that what we're talking about is a formula. So it isn't that the state says, what did Gloucester actually collect from its property taxes? And therefore, what does it have in its pocket to be able to pay? And the reason that isn't done is because communities could, in some ways, affect the formula
Right.
through their assessments and through their tax rates.
Right.
And so to equalize that, we look at equalized property valuation, which tries to put it all on a level playing field. So it's in some ways a construct number, it's not an actual number, number one. Number two, bear in mind that what this formula seeks to do is compare one community to another. So it's used for an analytical purpose to be able to figure out how much we should be funding. And the other
But isn't it subtracting from their ability to pay and the total nut? So that in a way, it's sort of comparing a community to another, but it's also saying, well, Gloucester has this many kids, they gotta spend that if the average from the state is that. So what do we have to replace?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the goal, is to figure out
Yeah.
what, as a matter of public policy, what the state's contribution to that total number should be. So there's required net school spending, and there's a foundation budget. The foundation budget is what we calculate by looking at all of these various things, and net school spending, required net school spending, is what we require the community to.
And that's where the Chapter 70 money comes from.
Exactly.
Right, because Mark was saying it had something to do with, as you say, the per unit head, that was also based on real estate and funding and all that, debt servicing and all that. He also said that they invented this way of doing it, and we're just listening like you are, because the idea of the school district themselves writing a check to charter schools just wasn't going to be in the original. and that, in the end, they felt, well, as long as we have some money to give to these school districts, we'll take their charter share out of their check. So it was a safer way rather than coming and taking a piece of property tax, but we take zero property tax. And that's way the largest share of public school funding, isn't it? I mean, isn't it way bigger property tax to Chapter 70?
Yes, and that's an outstanding point, and that's why I'm trying to move the number of the state share higher.
Yes.
Because I believe the state share of education should be higher, and particularly in communities like this one, who historically have received a relatively low number
Yeah.
as a percentage of foundation budget of state funding.
Yeah.
But I don't want to lose the other point.
Yeah.
So again, we're trying to figure out with this formula two different things. One, what it should cost to educate a student, let's say in Gloucester, and number two, what Gloucester can afford to pay.
The city of Gloucester.
That's correct.
Right.
And this number is not a number that's based on, okay, just how much did you collect in real estate taxes? It's how much of what you collected in real estate taxes should you have to contribute.
That's right.
And that number is based on, it's calibrated as against the wealth, which is supposed to be a measurement of how much of that people can afford to pay for schools.
And also, there's that other intangible, and I don't want to keep it going longer, is where the city council decides, here's your budget. Because they could say 35 million, they could say 25 million, and that would also affect that number the state had to referee over.
Well, yes and no, because they aren't allowed to fall below
Gotcha.
a particular
Okay.
number, because if they do, they forfeit their Chapter 78.
There you go.
And by the way, nor is the state allowed, in theory, to drop below a particular number. And that's why there's always that threat of a lawsuit when Chapter 70 is threatened to be reduced. A very important factor in all this.
So the testimony we had last week would say, wow, that's interesting that it's true citywide and average student by student, but if a student at East Gloucester School gets $6,800 spent on them, and a student at the high school gets $16,000 spent on them, in a way you might say that's sort of skewing the state's intention of spending that money on a kid.
Well, you may, again, except for the state is calculating what it thinks
It's an average.
the required
Yeah.
number should be. Well, not necessarily an average. Again, it's looking at the factors in that particular community. So for instance, one of the contentious factors historically has been the cost of labor. Because which labor market you're in determines what that number should be for your community. And in some communities, the example that I always use is North Andover versus Lawrence, where North Andover is in a labor market that presumably has to pay a lot more money, even though they're right next to Lawrence, which averages the number down in terms of the labor rate. So where you are in terms of the labor market area plays a role in this. So it's not as clear cut as it may seem, but I guess the main point I want to make is Gloucester can't merely say, okay, we're going to lower our contribution, and in doing so increase the state contribution. It doesn't work that way. There's tremendous risk if Gloucester were to try to do that. But the bigger point, and this is why I think Tony's comment is, and his suggestion is right on target, is that the fight that affects all of us, regardless of which set of schools we're interested in this community, is the fight to reform Chapter 70. And what I was going to suggest to you is that if you look at the various places in time where the legislature has acted, there is a strong correlation to either the presence or threat of litigation. And I suspect that I can suggest to you that it is not beyond the realm of possibility that very soon there will be another lawsuit of this nature.
Against the whole state as a whole, off over Chapter 70, not over just charter schools or...
That's correct. Historically, I feel so strongly about this that a number of years ago, when I was having this discussion with a similar body, Congressman Tierney suggested that he would help me find the individual that's been in the center of all the lawsuits in the country. And that individual happens to be at Columbia Teachers College in New York City, where I promptly went to find him with State Representative Brad Hill. And we had a conversation about the correlation between legal threat and legislative action, and it's a very high correlation. Now, the issue always is, on what basis do you bring the lawsuit? And again, I really apologize for the digression, but this is something that I feel very, very strongly about. And historically, the plaintiff class has been students in affected communities. And usually there's a nominee plaintiff on behalf of the students. So the group of parents will say, our students are being adversely affected because the amount of funding they get from the state depends on which part of the state they're in. And that is patently unfair, because they should all be entitled to a good education. Now, generally where the case law in the country comes down, even up to the Supreme Court, is that there are 7 things by which adequacy is measured. And if a community, or if a state, is meeting those, not a community, if the state is meeting adequacy on those 7 things, generally the courts have suggested that its obligations are being met as to fairness. That has been the pattern even in Massachusetts, where plaintiff classes have been historically parents in the name of students. I would suggest to you that the lawsuit that is impending will be with a different plaintiff class, which will be far more compelling, and perhaps take us in a different direction in the courts. Now also, as a member of the bar, I don't suggest litigation lightly. I wouldn't be involved in the subject, and I wouldn't even be entertaining the discussion of litigation if I weren't so frustrated with trying to move the legislature. And a number of us are. This is not only my fight. There have been a number of people working on this for a very long time. But the prospect of litigation may move the legislature to take this issue more seriously. So there's the issue of adequacy, and for years, I have been trying to get an adequacy study done to look at those 7 things through a modern prism and say, right now, is Massachusetts meeting its requirements? Because the last time it was done was in a case known as the Hancock case. Now that started out with a bunch of different plaintiffs, and this always happens because these cases are pending so long in the courts, the name of the plaintiff always changes, and sometimes the defendant, because it's usually the Secretary of Education. And so the parties always change, but the case remains the same. And the last case was known as the Hancock case, and it was resolved a few years ago now. And in that case, the Supreme Judicial Court said to a justice of the Superior Court, Judge Botsford, we want you to look at education in Massachusetts. And Judge Botsford compiled a report that was over 320 pages and pointed out all of the problems with educational funding in Massachusetts. By the way, Judge Botsford is now in the Supreme Court, so she did a pretty good job. But anyway, the Supreme Court took that report and was trying to make a decision on what to do, and the legislature was collectively holding its breath. Because if the Supreme Court, if the SJC said one of two things, one, we're going to develop a funding formula and you just pay the bill, legislature, there would have been a real huge problem. But even number two, if the court had made a finding that there was inadequacy and directed the legislature to solve this problem, it still would have been an issue because it's unclear that in the context of the state budget, there would have been the dollars necessary to remediate the problem. The court didn't do that. The court essentially said, you are making progress, you are not where you need to be, but because we're convinced that you are making progress, we are not going to rule in either of the two ways that the legislature had feared. And in some ways, when that decision was issued, number one, if you were on Beacon Hill, you heard the most incredible sigh of relief that you have ever heard. It's almost like when they
Back to sleep.
when they take Lackey off the mound in the Red Sox game these days. But at the same time, it did take the pressure off. I think the pressure may be increased again. And I guess what I would suggest to you, as folks who care about education, and as folks who care about being part of this community, that this may be a very important fight for us all to fight together. And in fact, in some of the earliest meetings relative to the formation of this school, the proponent suggested that they very much wanted to be part of that. And I appreciated those comments then, as I do now. That rather than have perhaps internal conflict, the much bigger issue is that the state isn't providing us with a fair amount of resources. And I think that's somewhat unifying. So I come back to where I started. I don't think that's an off-topic subject at all. In fact, I think it's critical. And again, I spend a lot of my days on the Senate floor arguing about this issue. And I just do not think that it's fair. Now, the one editorial comment I'll also make, because it's hard for me not to, is that in some ways the formula is also outdated. For instance, the cost of health care, in my opinion, is not adequately reflected in the formula as to the cost of education, nor is the cost of energy. And in fact, I've spoken with the author of the original formula, who's indicated that some agreement that the formula is not reflective of the current cost of educating a student because it doesn't recognize some of the factors either at all or to the extent that they should be recognized. And so one thing that I would encourage you to do, and we'll be happy to try to set this up, is maybe if you want to have a discussion. In the past, I've brought people from DOE, and again, it's pretty well known, or DESE, I'm sorry, into communities to have this discussion, to explain how it works in a way better than I just have. Because it is really fundamental to the question of how we fund education. And more importantly, perhaps even than that, it's fundamental to a student's opportunity to get an education in this state.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
I really applaud you for thinking about this equality in education, and whether it's between Manchester and Gloucester or this part of the country or the other. All of our kids need a really good education. What I'm unclear about is if you're looking for equality on the state level or on Chapter 70, why is it the same for charter school versus other kind, for Gloucester Public School? Why isn't that the same equality? Why do we have to have separate budgeting?
Well, I would suggest that if you wanted that kind of equality, then a charter school would be subject to the Chapter 70 amounts, and we would all get paid accordingly. But I'm not sure that you would want to receive the same amounts that Gloucester is receiving right now for educating a student from the state.
No, but equality in terms of everything.
Mm-hmm.
At this real estate tax and Chapter 70. I mean, the kids that go to Gloucester Public Schools and the kids that go to our school are the same kids, and all our kids in Gloucester, so why shouldn't they be equal? That's an equal funding and equal everything. That's what I'm unclear
Well,
about.
so again, I would ask the question, does that mean that you would want to spend the same amount per student here that the Gloucester Public Schools do?
I understand that we're pretty close.
Okay. Then that may be an appropriate avenue to pursue.
I'm also hearing, part of your beef is in the inequitability between communities.
That's correct.
Your beef is in the inequitability between students. I don't think you really disagree that a kid getting 11.7 in a Gloucester school, district school, shouldn't get 11.7 here.
Right.
I think your point is, how is that 11.7 figured between Wellesley, Manchester, Gloucester, and Marlborough?
That's correct.
So in a way, you're,
Well, my point is if you're concerned about equality from city to city, why
Yes.
aren't you concerned about equality from this school to that school?
I am.
Okay, so if we go to line item, how do we ensure that? Do we have a minimum that they can't cut out of a line item?
There's no line item that can't have its amount cut, whether it be Chapter 70 or any other.
well, that's her point.
That's-
If that's the only thing we're dependent on, and they cut that, then well.
But that can happen today.
But it can happen to one and not the other, and that's not equal.
That's true.
And that's the point I'm trying to make, it's not equal. Just like
Well,
chapter 70 is
sure.
equal.
And one way that we could try to address that, in my opinion, is to bring charter schools within the embrace of the Chapter 70 formula and then treat everyone evenly.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated issue because, and by the way, I appreciate you coming tonight. And also the fact that we're almost immediately entering into the discussion of Chapter 70, which was back to the first time I met you.
I just like venting about Chapter 70. I haven't had this discussion in a while.
So I remember days in my work with Stand for Children, coming down and speaking with you with a delegation from a number of communities on that same issue, and here we are at it again still. And I think you get a sense already that there's a lot of people here that are concerned on that issue and need support further discussion on it. I think the issue here about the per pupil spending in the district versus the charter is a complicated one because it's not an apples to apples comparison. When you're dealing with a charter school, you're dealing with, to begin with, the physical plant that the school has to maintain, has to pay rent on, has to do all of that's involved in that. It's a very different situation for a public school system. And so the funding mechanism for charters is different, partly because there are different circumstances for those two different types of schools. And I think that's partly where it gets complicated, because it can be boiled down to a rather oversimplification about what's being paid at one elementary school as opposed to what's being paid at the charter. So I think that's...
So help me understand the difference in the physical plant, though.
We have to, in order to have a school, we've had to lease a building and have to pay rent on a monthly basis, which is different circumstances from a district school that has its own property and its own schools. Certainly there's maintenance costs that the district has to deal with. We all know that. And we know the challenges of that for many years. So I don't think I'm going to go into the details of one or the other, but I think I just wanted to point that issue out. I think the larger point I wanted to just to say to you is that I think the resolution put forward by the school committee is an interesting one, and the fact that you are supporting legislation that would at least start a study group, as you suggested. I think the larger thing I'm taking from that is a possibility of a gesture toward further reconciliation within Gloucester about this issue around the charter and the funding issue and the debate that's been going on for so many years about this. And I think there's certainly interest among a number of us, whether that's been made plain or not, in trying to enter into a more cooperative relationship with the district. And I think one of the challenges with the funding issue particularly is that, like it or not, on the charter side or against the charter, the fact that that is such a bone of contention between us, I think creates these firewalls between a lot of what we have, between the two types of schools, and coming to some common answers to common issues. You know, before you came, we were discussing some about the challenge of teaching the population that we have in Gloucester as being, particularly from certain neighborhoods, being particularly challenging, and that many of us started this school because we were concerned about that. It wasn't about what's happening for our kids individually. It was much more about what's happening citywide for the betterment of students who, for whatever reason, probably in many cases against because of the challenges of educating the population, in spite of the best efforts of many good teachers, they haven't succeeded for whatever reason. So our feeling in setting up the school, this charter school, was partly this to try to address some of those citywide issues. And I see this funding issue as having created this firewall between the district and the charter in facing those very same, very common challenges that we have. And I just put that out because I think that we are trying to be as open as possible about considering this resolution and not fall back to the usual stand of, you know, there they go again, or there they go again. I think we're trying to come to study the issue very seriously and to see if there's a way, either through this motion or through some other dialogue, to start on the path toward making the charter school and the district come together to deal with the common challenges that we have with the population we have. And some of us, I think, I hope you understand, are deeply committed to that in our own work and in our personal lives. And we don't, burn up our evening hours here because we enjoy the
camaraderie.
barbs and the text.
I appreciate that, and you may or may not know that my response to the resolution was a letter, which many of you probably haven't seen, which said that I am supporting and have filed legislation to create a study methodology to look at this. And I encourage the school committee, as I would encourage all of you, to come to the public hearing that day and discuss this issue with the committee. Because I do think this is, and you've seen this as much or more as I have, the way that firewall gets put up in many instances and in many communities. And I would just as soon elevate the discussion rather than continue to run into the wall. And I think there's real potential to do that. The other thing, though, that I just, again, living in the moment for just a second, resolving the Chapter 7 issue has for many years meant you needed more money because you had to hold everybody harmless. Otherwise, you couldn't get the votes, just as a practical matter, to bring everybody to where they should be. If the gaming legislation passes, and it passes with this new fund for education, it will be the first time, probably since 1993, that money will be on the table. And that's the reason I am so concerned right now, because I don't want the money to get used for something else other than solving this problem. So I think we all have a collective interest in trying to direct what happens with that amount of money.
The lottery money definitely becomes a
Well, there's
target over time.
There's both those changes. No, there's lottery, but I'm actually talking about in this gaming bill, there is a fund called an education fund, which right now has only one directive in the bill, at least in the Senate version of the bill. And that directive is that the money cannot be used to supplant Chapter 70. So in other words, we can't reduce Chapter 70 and say, well, we're going to backfill this with the gaming money. Aha! So what should we be using this money for? to address the problems with Chapter 70, not to supplant it.
Isn't that difficult politically, though? The reform of Chapter 70 has been difficult for years, partly because of the differentials between districts, and you have districts that actually benefit from the way the system currently
No
is,
doubt.
when you have the Gloucesters and some others that don't.
Well, and it's self-perpetuating because those
Of course, we're getting
12-year
those votes.
districts.
But that's exactly the point that I'm making, though, is that until you have money on the table so that you can protect the so-called winners from backsliding, you have no hope of changing this.
Yeah.
We are about to have money on the table. And so I've suggested in
Blackjack table, that's it.
I've suggested that we address that in two ways. One, that we use the money first to address disparities between like communities and solve that problem. And two, try to get every community up to a minimum of 20% of its foundation budget being paid for by the state. If we do not do that, my concern is that the money will go who knows where over the years, and maybe from time to time gets appropriated for one thing and then another thing. And I guess, I've been in the legislature since 1993, and every year I've tried to change the formula. Someone will say exactly what you just said, that unless we protect the folks who think they're winners, we can't get the votes to change it. Well, now we have the money, potentially, to protect those people and accomplish a good result.
So Senator Tarr, if the issue that drives part of this thinking, your thinking, is equity, has the legislature decided with the gaming dollars that will be coming in, a percentage of those gaming dollars that's supposed to go?
Yes. I apologize, I don't have the number for you tonight, but we'll certainly get it for you. But it's a fairly substantial number. It's on the order of magnitude of about 14%
Okay.
of the revenue from gaming. Now,
Statewide?
yes. Now, this bill is about as convoluted as you could possibly imagine. And so it sets up all of these funds, and money from this goes to that. And you're going to hear about that if you watch me on the Senate floor next week. But for the purposes of this discussion, just the general revenue that comes from gaming, when those dollars start to flow, a significant percentage of it is to be used for education, not to supplant Chapter 70, and that's about the only directive that the bill has in it right now.
So if Manchester receives 27%, and you want everyone at least 20%.
Correct.
So they're not going to lower Manchester.
Right. And that's the point that David raises, that in the past, communities would fear that they would go down so that other people could go up. Now, it doesn't matter if it would be fair to bring those other communities up. The communities that are up now don't want to go down.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is that this is the first time I've seen in a long time that we would have the money to be able to fix some of these problems. Now, to your question, will it be enough money, is I think where you're going.
Right.
I can't answer that, and that's part of the problem with the gaming bill, is that no one can really tell you how much money it's going to generate as a total. So therefore, to say 14% of that is X is impossible to do. All I'm saying is that if the answer has always been, to my attempts, that we don't have the money because we can't hold harmless the communities that might go down, my answer is this is the first time I've seen where the potential is to have that money. Now, I will be the first to tell you, because of a number of factors, the deck is stacked, I'm using another pun that I shouldn't, against my amendment. I'm probably going to lose that amendment. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to fight as hard as I can for it. Number one. Number two, I would fight this fight even if there weren't new money on the table, because I think it's the right thing to do. And I think if we had to take a percentage of new state revenue into this, I would think it was still the right thing to do. If suddenly taxes started to generate more money, I would say, okay, we still ought to be looking at this. But the fact is that now there's an identifiable source that we haven't had in recent memory. The other thing to bear in mind is that these funds don't start flowing for a while. In other words, you did an incredible job of building this school in very short notice, but apparently the folks in the casino business can't do the same thing. So it's going to take them a while to build these palaces, these casinos for gaming. And so we don't see that money right away. It takes a period of time for that revenue to flow, but that's why I think we have a plan now for how we're going to use it to address these problems.
And if you start making the case now and squawk and squawk and squawk, you might end up getting a piece of it. You might not get the whole thing that you're looking for, but over time. Can I just say something? You and I have been friends for well over 20 years. And I even took this guy winter sailing in January.
I was interested if you were going to bring that up.
And I know Dan Martin. But I am going to look you in the eye and say, thank you for coming, because I got to be honest, been here from the beginning. As Israel has always felt questioned on its right to exist, I've always felt our local government questioned our right to exist. So the way to get through that is for you to come back and see our wonderful school in action, and for you to come here tonight is a great way to see how assiduous this board is, because I've been to all the meetings, and a couple of times you guys came in and hit us pretty hard, sometimes down here. So I want to just say I appreciate you coming tonight. I hope you'll come back and see what we've done. So even, well, I think it's great if the money thing gets solved, but even if it doesn't, we want to be your school. So,
I appreciate that.
and I don't mean to be out of
No. And let me just say that, while we may have had disagreements in the past, we may still agree or disagree on issues. Good representation means always talking.
That's right.
And always listening.
Yeah. Hell, we're just in the show together, right?
But I'm happy to come back. Again, there are things that we may agree on, there are things that we may disagree on. But the discussion is important, and out of that discussion.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Yeah,
right?
no, I agree.
Just
One thing that I really like about what you've been saying is that whatever their differences and whatever the kind of small civil war we've had in Gloucester about the charter school versus the district schools, that we should be thinking, both the district school folks and us, charter folks, should be thinking, one, about litigation as a spur to school reform at the state level. And the second is that we should we should be part of coalitions to reform Chapter 70. That your wider point is that the big disparities in the state come from the way Chapter 70 works, and that both charter school people and regular district school supporters have a deep interest in that reform and making that fair. I just would say on the district school side, even in our local civil wars, that it would be good for people to realize that the legislature so far has made a zero-sum game between charter school innovation, which a lot of people are in favor of, and regular district school budgets. So that when people often have, at least conceptually, a choice to make between supporting some new innovative kind of thing or supporting their regular public schools, which is an intolerable choice. And I just would like to think that there might be some way that choice could be avoided. On the charter school side, I would say, despite the fact that Massachusetts has a better record than most states, I would say, as a critic of the charter school movement, that an awful lot of charter schools don't earn their public keep. And I say that because a lot of charter schools don't represent a democratic diversity of the kids who need better schooling. A lot of charter schools cream off academically talented children and families and don't serve special needs or working class or poor children. So that a lot of charter schools are under false pretenses here. The other charter school public contribution that charter schools should be making is real innovation. And again, on the charter school movement, I feel an awful lot of charter schools are not really that innovative. So I like the way that you are trying to say both these camps have some interest in common that they should be pursuing, And I'm saying that both these movements, or at least groups of people, aren't very aware of the limitations in their own outlook. It doesn't seem to me we should have to choose between supporting regular school budgets and promoting innovation in education, nor does it seem to me right that a lot of charter schools aren't really performing a public function. They're not either innovating in a way that would help the rest of the school system, nor are they serving kids that are really in need of better schooling and aren't being now well served.
I appreciate your comments. It gives me a chance to also respond to something you said and something David said a little while ago, and that just as you're here burning long hours into the evening and wrestling with how you're going to keep the doors open, how you're going to keep the lights on, how you're going to make sure you provide the best you can for the students that are under your care, I would suggest to you that same thing is true at the Gloucester School Committee. And some really dedicated people are wringing their hands trying to figure out the very, very same things. And so I think that is a point of commonality. I think it's easy to understand that if they feel that they're being threatened with that you're going to get the response that you have in some cases. But the idea, and I was there for the creation of charter schools in 1993. It was part of that bill that I voted against for the reason that I explained, not because it included charter schools. But part of the idea was that if we were going to spend billions of taxpayer dollars, we were not only going to be content with just trying to fund what we had, we were trying to make it all increase and make it better. And there are a bunch of different ways that we would do that. But the idea behind charter schools, as was expressed on the floor of the House, because back then I was young and I was in the House, was that charter schools were going to be places where innovation would be developed that could be replicated in other places. And that was the value of the investment. That we were going to look at these things, say what worked, and take what worked and try to make it applicable for the benefit of many, many more, rather than just the group that was involved in the direct charter school. So if they aren't doing that, if there's a school that isn't doing that, then it is betraying the promise that was made at that time. And again, I feel somewhat qualified to say that because I was there for the debate. I was heavily involved in the debate, more around funding than this issue. Wonderful take.
Going to sort of all those comments and really trying to sort of wrap this up, so I'm conscious now 8:15, and I really
You guys got me
appreciate your
started.
Well, actually, it's great you're here, and really appreciate it. But going to sort of Jay's last comment there, talking about the Civil War, it's actually been a most uncivil war in many cases, and not from comments made from here. We've actually stayed away in following or in keeping with the same example that you have taken at every meeting. I'm actually just going to your friend's comment in the corner there. I haven't seen you take any low shots. Going back to my initial comment, I really appreciate the fact that you have not engaged in any of that kind of activity and made your coming back to the beginning of this evening, your comments very clear right from the beginning that it didn't involve this specific school or its performance, its benefit, but the specific issues that you mentioned and have mentioned all along. But it's very difficult
Since
for
you're
us.
referring to me, I think December 24th might fit that description. The meeting where we were all fighting for our lives.
No, there were others there at the meeting, I think, who said things, but certainly from my experience of sitting there and having to listen to it, that I felt you being really clear right from the beginning, and I'm very appreciative of it. So, and it's just interpretation, so we may not.
And I'm referring to both our government.
But going to more directly to the issue of this city particularly and moving forward, and this last week is a good example of it. I think that comparisons of, if we continue to go down the route of where we're spending years of saying, well, the charter's doing this and these other district schools are doing this, and that it's divisive. It doesn't encourage collaboration, which is actually at the core of the mission of this school, is to engage in collaboration. And in fact, it's one of the mandatory pieces in charter accountability, is how are you taking what you're learning out into the greater community, both within your district and outside of that. So how are you engaging in the building of collaboration and dialogue? How is it not time, I guess the question I have for you, to move beyond the divisive, often simplistic statements being made either in blogs or in the paper, in editorials, and move towards collaboration, move towards districts and educators who share so much in terms of the challenges we have in common with those placed in our charge, to make education better for all children in Gloucester. And that anything that stands in the way of doing that, I just don't see how you justify it. I mean, I understand certainly the difficult world of politics and getting things done, but certainly as one who has been on the football that's being kicked around for the past year, often for agendas not remotely associated with the specific children, Gloucester children in our care, isn't it time to find a way to move beyond these much smaller arguments to work together on these much, much more important issues on which there would be, I think, significant agreement and much more power because we'd be working together.
Yes.
Let me suggest that politics is a game of numbers. And obviously leverage is derived from having more voices in agreement on a particular subject.
Yep.
And again, I hearken back to one of the most powerful things that this community has done with regard to education in the recent past is a participation in Stand for Children and turning out a significant number of what has been upwards of 1,000, 2,000 people on Beacon Hill to say that we need to have change. And that's, for those of us that fight in the trenches, to have that leverage is incredibly important. In fact, it's essential. If I stand up and I'm very passionate about things as I have been tonight, but there isn't a group of people saying, yes, that's right, then I'm less effective than I otherwise would be. Now, I'm still always going to do what I believe is right. That's never going to change. But my effectiveness is made immeasurably stronger by having people group together and say this is a common goal that we think we need to address.
Well, I hope that this is the first of many conversations, and certainly for myself, would volunteer to be helpful and supportive in any way possible on some of the discussion pieces that we've had tonight. And that I hope you will work to help build bridges so that there is more recognition that these are also children of Gloucester. These are children who have the right to choice. They made that choice, and to use their education and the choice they made as a battering ram to attack other processes, whatever they might be and whatever people's feelings on it, is something that really needs to end. And we need to really move on together for the benefit of this city and for all children in it. So I really appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, again, I'm happy to come. I'm happy to have discussions. I think you know where I stand on some things, and you know, I will never tell local officials what to do. I respect their autonomy. I respect their authority, and if they have legitimate grievances, I think they need to continue to work on those and to have them addressed and not feel like their concerns were predetermined. However, I also think that we can't miss opportunities to try to do things that are of benefit.
Yeah,
And you know, I would suggest to you that that happens with me and my colleagues every day. I work on pieces of legislation, you know, members that I might have disagreed with on the last piece of legislation. But if I were to say because I disagreed with them on one, I would never work with them on another, that wouldn't make me very effective, would it?
Well, it's,
Trustees, do you have all the trustees? No. I'll quickly just take a second break. Tour of the
table there.
Very nice to see you. Yeah, same as
Thank you.
we getting ready for this now. I appreciate it.
And I'll be here.
No, this is our anniversary back.
We getting ready for our next set?
Having some.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. It's you know,
On a 210?
on New Year's Day, it was about 20 below zero.
Well, let's just say.
And then somebody at the price board, he says, let's stop for a sandwich. I'm like, I don't know my favorite.
Well, what the sandwich vendor was doing out there, well, never know.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you. See you for this. All right. Thank you, everyone. I thought that was, and again, as we continue our due diligence into that, I thought that was very good session. And talking about the broader issues, Chapter 70. I remember the first time I got a letter asking me why I was going onto the charter board. My response was, this really isn't about, one thing or the other. There's a bigger picture here, which is the inadequate funding mechanism that we have. And I probably wrote that letter a year and a half ago, and it's great to hear that kind of response. Anyway, let's move ahead here. I think what we need to do now is get to the governance committee meeting update. So Jay, why don't you pick up from here?
Okay, the governance committee meeting has put the name of Ira Yavner up to the board, who's
here tonight.
who's sitting here tonight. We have gone through our process and we have discussed Ira, and we feel he would be a terrific addition to this board. And he's sitting right here. And if any of you have any questions, I know all of you have seen his CV, I think, and I think some of this group have already talked to him. But if you have questions or comments, or if Ira would like to say hello, that would probably be appropriate.
I'll review the floor if you'd like to.
Hello.
The word is like it.
Ira, could you tell us a little bit about why you're interested in doing the work?
Yeah, I have been in the background of this fight for the past year. I notice people are reluctant to say fight, but it's been a fight, and you people have won as far as I'm concerned, and I wanted to be a part of continuing the battles that exist and bring together just what was talked about in the last 2 minutes, the collaboration of the Gloucester School Committee and this group right here, in a common cause for the kids of Gloucester. And I think my background in education and in business management may help. And so if I could accomplish a public relations victory of bringing everyone together, as you saw those 4 women last meeting begin to, members of the school committee, begin to talk, there was dialogue and there was some feedback and there was some corrections, and nobody threw hand grenades, and there were no guns, and that can really expand. So that's one of my purposes. In teaching, I taught adaptive physical education to special needs kids. That was one extreme. And I coached high school football. So my day was with superior athletes and kids that just couldn't walk and chew gum at all. And it was a great experience to see both extremes. And this is what this is all about here. The needs are the same but so different. They need to be cared for, both extremes. And I think this is what excites me about this. Because these kids here, you have both extremes.
Very true.
And just, not that it's any formal assessment in any way, but I had the privilege of having a cup of coffee with Ira in Manchester at a local cafe there, and had while we were having coffee, in walked this extremely still healthy-looking man in his, 40s or late 30s.
One of my ex-players?
Yeah,
Might have been
ex-athlete,
50s.
who immediately recognized Ira, and you hadn't seen each other in how many years?
30 years.
30 years. And came over immediately and talked about how much Ira had meant to him at a particular moment in his life, and how the values he'd learned had carried him on with him right through all of his life. And it was just another reminder of how important these years are, and that you have good role models, because the teaching's going on,
Appreciate
not
that.
just in the classroom, so it was great.
I'll just ask a quick question, Ira. We have all these various subcommittees where, we are a very hard-working board. As I said earlier, this is our 4th meeting this month. It's for the Board of Trustees. We are starting a facilities committee, we have a finance committee, we have an outreach committee that is going to be revived, program, governance. Where would you see yourself, making a difference or a contribution?
Well, I think 2 areas that I feel comfortable. I certainly would like to deal with the finances of this organization. My background as a financial planner for 32 years would help me with this, but more important is that I know, because I was an athletic director in public schools, I know budgets, I know appropriations, I know moving money and so on. I could help there. The second thing is to make sure that these kids have an athletic or recreation curriculum that gives them activity so that they are viable, healthy kids, as well as their mental work and their educational work. They need to, doesn't have to be team sports as much as just carryover activities, and that they get good exercise and they're stimulated to take care of themselves. Because the kids in general aren't doing that. And this is a great opportunity in a small district to do that, You have a gym. We could build a mini Gillette Stadium out there. So those 2 areas I could help.
It's true.
Whatever you decide.
Any other questions for Ira? At that point, Jay, what's your recommendation from we recommended nomination?
I recommend that we nominate, and if it's appropriate, I would nominate Ira Yadner to be a new board member.
Second.
So we put that in the form of a precise motion? Do we have to do that?
You sort of did. Is your motion to approve?
Nikki can get that down, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Motion to
Approve the recommended nominee to the board, is how you wrote it here. That's a pretty good way to put
That's
it.
exactly the way to put it. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And do we have a second?
Just Jimmy, you're a genius.
Second.
Thank you, Susan. Any discussion?
I'd like to thank you again, Ira, for coming to this meeting. You've been to some other meetings before this as well, so thank you for really putting in some time here and doing the open house the other day as well. I appreciate that, thank you.
Any more questions, Councilor? About Ira? Okay. Let's put to a vote. All in favor?
Unanimous.
Welcome. Move to this side.
It's welcome, Ira. We're glad to have you aboard.
Thank you.
It's a great honor to have you with us. And we look
Thank you
forward
for
to
your support too. Looking forward to it.
Let's see.
The only other governance thing is that we have an evaluation form for the executive director, which we would like the executive director to look at carefully and give us feedback on and see whether it seems the right thing. And similarly, we have a form for the evaluating our board itself. And we
What?
And we want the board members to take a look at it and see whether that needs and this or that. And I would say, in addition to that, that all of us have owe thanks to Art Bean and to Dave Buchanan for all the work that they put in on these two documents. At times, my contribution was to read the draft that was an earlier draft that had already been superseded. So I was playing catch-up sometimes, but I think see what you think, Tony, about the executive director evaluation, and see what you think it needs, and suggest, give us feedback on that. But similarly, board members, you should look at the how we evaluate ourselves as a board. I see these two, I think we all see these two pieces of evaluation as meshing ultimately with our commitment to ourselves to also every year do an end of the year evaluation of the whole school. But these would be pieces of how we evaluate each other en route. So anyway, thanks to Dave and Art for all the work.
I would just like to add to that evaluation is going to be part of the ongoing culture here, to make sure that we are always improving or finding where we need improvement and addressing how we make those improvements happen. And to that very point, I would like to ask all the board to come, when we come to our next board meeting, our regular board meeting, which would be the first Wednesday of the month, which would be a week from tonight, if we could all be ready and having looked at these and reviewed them, I would really like to see us vote on approving and accepting these, because we are now getting into the year, and we really need to get on this. If we're going to, walk the walk and all this stuff, we really need to get the evaluations going. So I'd love to see that. Art, please.
So I'd like to suggest, and I spoke to Nikki after our governance committee, that and I have copies here tonight, that she can copy and mail to each of the members of the board so that they're prepared, everyone is prepared next Wednesday to embrace, make comments, editing comments, etc., and then we can get started the following week.
Perfect.
Okay?
The next board meeting is next Wednesday.
Yes, right from today.
At what
Yeah.
time?
Was that the fifth?
Yes.
Typically 6:30?
About 6:30, yeah, we'll have a final date. It depends if there are other meetings beforehand, Susan. There may be, like, we haven't had a finance committee meeting in a couple of weeks, and, it'd be great to see the facilities meeting finally going. So we may have to, it depends on,
6 or 6:30?
around there typically, yeah. We usually have 1 or 2 meetings before the board trustees meeting. Okay. And then again, because there's the finance committee that we talked about, update on the 501c3. I'm sorry, are we all done with governance issues?
We have to review a thing for board orientation.
Oh, you want to talk about that for a second, board retreat orientation? Sure.
I exchanged emails with Tony a couple of times about the possibility of November 11th.
Okay.
That is a day where the community chorus is going to be presenting at the town hall, I believe, in the morning.
Yeah, we haven't got a specific time yet, but at the opening of Veterans Day celebrations, yeah.
So what we have not ironed out, and hopefully we can decide next week, is if we're going to have a board retreat, what time of day it would be on the 11th.
At 11:11 on 11:11:11.
What else?
What else?
That's at 11:11, right?
11:11:11.
All right, well, that's it.
So maybe that could be.
Yeah, I think through the board, what I would suggest is, or through the chair, I would suggest that we, I've been in contact with John Carvin around leading this retreat, which he's quite happy to do, and facilitating it. Let me talk to find out exactly when the choir is performing, because it'd really be important to have as many people as possible attending to both support the choir and to recognize the importance of Veterans Day. And then as soon as I have that time, I'll contact John Tarver and make sure he can start in terms of a facilitated retreat, and then I'll notify everyone of that. So we've got the meeting next week, so by next week I should be able to confirm the exact time. But at the moment, it seems like in terms of attendance, that was the best date for everybody. And so I would assume that it will go forward, and it's just a matter of confirming times for the choir and then the beginning of our own session.
Do we have a sense of how much time we're planning on for that?
Well, generally for this type of training, it's a full day. So it'll be I had a couple of conversations with John Tarvin and with Jennifer Feller on it. And so it'll be a very tight schedule to do it in a half day. But my guess would be if, for example, we started at 12, if that included some welcoming sort of reception, refreshment, that we'd be going to 4.
Mm-hmm. Has there been discussion about what the topics will be for the retreat? I know there have been a couple of things have come out of discussions we've had over the last couple of months, but...
Well, the main thrust, from my understanding before of earlier discussions, but maybe going much earlier, was to not do what we did the last time, which was we ended up trying to mix strategic planning with what's really governance training. And governance is focusing on the partnership and leadership between the executive directors, management of the school, and the board as trustees of the school and its mission, and the overseers of the executive director. And that I'm the one person both hired, evaluated, assessed, and assigned tasks by the board. And so the real focus would be on the responsibilities of trustees of a public charter school, and all the different pieces of that, and then specifically focusing by looking at case studies and discussing those with situations that have come up in real institutions with boards functioning and executive directors functioning, or with leadership in the school in terms of management around a specific topic, what they did, and then exploring those case studies and having discussion about where this group might have come down on it. So dividing, my expectation is that the board will actually divide into working groups on different case studies, with the groups mixing and moving around. But those case studies will be used as a tool to engage in dialogue. So the goal of the day is actually to come out with a shared understanding and language for the vital partnership and leadership that exists between, and needs to exist between the executive director and the board.
And I think that one of the things that you and I talked about was having some focus on making the distinction between governance and management.
Yes, that's right.
So that people know exactly where their responsibilities lie and where the boundary lines individually as well as a group lie, so that we become more efficient trustees in our work.
Perhaps there might be some discussion at that meeting about how we go about setting some goals for ourselves. I just understand your point, Tony, about not turning it into a strategic planning session, but I think we also want to move ahead on that eventually, probably sooner than later.
Well, and that's actually a good timing, I think, Dave, because the evaluations are what keep you on target. So you may decide, which I made the point the last time we talked about the evaluations, that I had actually seen them, although they've changed now in terms of slightly in terms of format, but that the lion's share of the work had been sort of done on putting an evaluation tool together. And then any one year, you may actually make minor adjustments to it to be sure that the goals specific to that year are being able to be assessed both for the board in terms of its own performance and the executive director in terms of executive director's performance. And so I think it'd be a really good idea, actually, if we came out of that meeting with the clarity on functions, the partnership, the distinction of partnership, of leadership, or governance versus management, and goals, that would actually be a very good goal for the day. To have those, yeah, it's an excellent idea.
Okay, so the governance committee meeting update, it's all finished?
That's it.
That's it, okay.
There's one item, I think it's E, it says motion to approve evaluation tools for board of trustees. I'd like to, with your permission, table that until after people receive
Absolutely.
these two documents, and then we can revisit that next week.
Absolutely, yeah, that's sort of our homework assignment to,
Yeah.
absolutely, thank you very much. We'll be.
Not just the board, but from Tony too.
Yes.
Yes, okay, and there was no finance committee meeting since the, I think there was one earlier in the month, but there has not been one since this last meeting was set up. So nothing to report there, but we will have an update on the 501c3 at the next meeting when the trustees meet, regardless of whether there's a finance committee meeting or not. So Dave and I have been working on that. So with that, let's move to item number 9 on the agenda, which is possible agenda items for the next meeting. Anyone have any thoughts?
I have two. One is to hear what people's thoughts are, and I already should get a, excuse me, for the record, Nikki, we want to make sure that Mr. Yapner gets copies of these. Okay.
Thanks.
So we can have a discussion about people's thoughts around the evaluation tools, Tony and board members. And the other one is, I think we ought to entertain some discussion about open house schedule for the balance of the year for, if not October, November, December, January, February, all the way through May, to have that an ongoing event for promoting the school. So those are two things that I thought of.
Actually, in the broader context, you could say the entire outreach.
Yeah.
Enrollment period.
Yeah, period, yeah, I would frame it in a broader, yeah, exactly, important things. There will be a program committee meeting between now, next meeting?
No, actually, our program committee meeting is Thursday the 13th.
Okay, so it will be no update from programming then, okay. Thursday the 15th, okay.
And one more item I'd like to add is, and it's a small detail, but to make sure that the head of school is, from this point on, when it's appropriate, to include all emailings about board meetings and agenda items, so that if she is expected to, Jody's expected to give a report, she knows what to prepare for.
Yeah, through the chair, I'd suggest that we, unless there's some reason not to, given that these agendas are public and on our website, that we should actually send it to all employees, staff of the school. It's good for them to know the hard work the board are doing, how they're being supported by it. The other suggestion I was going to have, I think it can be very good for a board to periodically have through the executive director, a member of staff come and present, talk about the work that they do as a practitioner in the school. And we're very lucky to have some really outstanding teachers here. I don't want to commit for any one of them, but we've made significant progress and changes in terms of the delivery of special education support for students in the school, which actually I really wrestled, I have to say, because it really is support for all students, because these practices and culture are about supporting all students. I haven't figured out a way to say it yet, but I just wanted to say it. I keep stumbling over it, and that's fine. But so whether we also have an outstanding director of arts integration, and so with the permission of the board, I'd like to speak to a couple of different individuals. I think any one of them would be outstanding to present to the board, but I'd like to invite and add to the agenda having one of the practitioners come and speak at our next meeting. and share with some of their thoughts and plans.
That would be great. It's a terrific idea. Very much like Gordon's bringing in the artist of the week.
Yeah, I'd actually like to talk to her too about, is that Soane, is that her name?
No, Shay Casual.
Shay, I'm sorry, Soames, yeah.
So is
Yeah, because I'd like to talk to her about our integration, like going up to Cable right next door. We don't need to rent a bus to do that. They're ready. We could take them 15 at a time and show them how TV shows are made.
It'd be great.
It'd be great. But I don't want to just go, hey, everybody, do it through Shay. That's
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
Terrific idea.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Tony does a very good
And
job.
other
The board
things.
is to replace that, bringing someone from this faculty staff.
John, that's,
Any other?
James, I just wonder if you had to have us like a standing item that would have to be an update from the head of school at the board meetings, just on the programmatic aspect. Not in the depth that she would likely do it for a program committee, but just an overview anyway of what progress they've made on certain
What the
challenges,
issues
or
are.
what the challenges are, and perhaps how we can assist with that. So I think it's important to have the direct communication that way.
Wonderful way for the board to.
And I think if Joe's, if the head of school feels that there's a meeting where it's not as important to do that, I think that should be her option. I don't want to have her tied to coming to every single board meeting, but I think I'd like to have that door open to make it, to welcome that communication.
Sure, I think that's a terrific idea also. Again, anything that brings the board more in closer contact with what's going on, it contributes to the evaluation process, it keeps us more aware of what the, as Gordon say, the priorities, the projects and the problems are that we're dealing with. I think that's a wonderful idea. Yeah, thanks, David. It's a terrific idea. Okay, so any other ideas for either open standing agenda items or particular agenda items, Susan, anything? Okay. Well, if that's the case, I think what I'd like to do is say, first of all, thank you to everyone. Again, this is the fourth meeting we've had this month as a board of trustees. There's been at least one finance committee meeting, one or two governance committee meetings, I think, I'm not sure. But there's been a lot of work done, and it's all greatly appreciated. We have a lot of work to do, and I think this is the right way to attack it. And we've definitely made some progress this month. We obviously have a lot of challenges still ahead of us, so I look forward to working with all of you on more of those. Having said that, I think it's probably time to adjourn the meeting. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn. I second that.
Discussion, any discussion?
No.